This podcast is brought to you by Freewheel's buy-side technology, Beeswax. I know a little something about Beeswax. I used to be the CEO. You may know Beeswax as the industry's only bidder-as-a-service with customizable, transparent, and controllable buy-side tech, but it's evolved to be so much more. Beeswax creates a direct connection between advertisers and Freewheel's premium publisher supply that enables performance-driven CTV buying. Beeswax's tools are designed to connect linear and digital TV and create scale in a world with increasing third-party identifiers, so you can easily navigate the complete video ecosystem. To learn more, go to freewheel.com/beeswax/pod. That's freewheel.com/beeswax/pod. Welcome to the Marketecture Podcast. I'm Ari Paparo. We have an exciting show today. We're talking about out-of-home, digital out-of-home, known as OO or DO, depending on how you would like to say it. We have Tim Rowe, who is the founder and the host of the OOHInsider podcast. He's going to tell us all about digital out-of-home. In terms of Marketecture, we had a scoop this week. So the Monopoly Report yesterday that we're recording on Thursday. So on Wednesday, we published the deck that DoubleClick used to sell itself to Google. It had a lot of nuggets that hadn't been shown publicly before, including their estimate that the buyer would make $2.6 billion a year in media. Turned out to be a pretty conservative estimate. And next week, I'm going down to Virginia. I'm going to be in the courthouse reporting like an ink-stained wretch every day, daily updates. So if you want to know everything that happened, who sneezed, what the judge said, what Jason Kint said to me in the hallway, you're going to get all that every day. I don't know who wants to subscribe to this, but if you're one of those people, this is the Super Bowl. We're ready to go. All right. I am joined today by Eric Franchi, as always. Eric, great to have you.
Great to see you both.
And Tim Rowe. Tim, how are you doing?
It's great to be here. Ari, that is an exciting courtroom coverage. Serious, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and if I'm not returning your emails or tweeting next week, it's because there are no phones allowed in the courtroom. I'm going to be effectively offline from 9 to 5 every day for really the rest of my life. Which will be fun.
To the lion's den.
Can you handle the amount of handwriting that you might need to do?
I'm gonna have to stretch. I'm going to Staples today. I'm getting some legal pads. I'm doing some prep work. I bought a laser printer. That was my big prep work this week. I bought myself a laser printer because I just printed out all the exhibits. It's gonna be ridiculous. All right, Tim. Out of home, man. Tell me why we should care. Let's just start there. I've decided to take a grumpy approach to this meeting because, everyone tells me I should care about out of home. They've told me for 20 years, and now I've got the man. So convince me why it's the most exciting thing I've ever heard about.
No pressure. Convince you why. The case for digital out of home in general remains that it's the most powerful connected broadcast channel in the world. If you want to reach a lot of people with a unified message, out of home might be one of the most stable, scalable ways to do it. So I think it's wildly underpriced. It's incredibly efficient from a media delivery standpoint. There's probably no better builder of top of funnel than offline attention. So those are some of the reasons why I think digital out of home is relevant.
All right. How big is it? How big is the digital out-of-home market?
It's not big enough. It's not big enough. It's about 21 billion globally. It's about 5 billion here in the US. And while that number continues to grow up and to the right, it's the only traditional format that continues to grow. Share of wallet continues to decline. It's about 5% share of wallet globally. It's 2.4% share of wallet here in the US. And what's scary is by 2028, even though that number is going to continue to move in the direction that looks good, that 2.4% share of wallet is going to drop to 2%. So it's got challenges.
Point of clarification, the $5 billion in the US, is that digital out of home or is that all of out of home? And if it's...
That's digital out of home. Digital out of home. All of out of home. It's about 10 billion.
Okay. So it's like half of the market.
Yes. Half of the market going to digital out of home and a growing percentage being transacted programmatically.
Is the same globally?
Same globally in terms of transacting programmatically? Is that the question?
No, just market size. Is it basically this is, digital has eaten half of it?
That as a rule, I think is fair.
So my perception of the segmentation of the market is that there's really three segments, and you're going to tell me if I'm right or wrong. Segment number one is just in cinema, which actually is surprisingly big. Those ads you see before the movie plays. Segment number 2 is really high end, like JC Deco, integrated units or Times Square. And then segment 3 is small screens everywhere else. Is that an accurate way to look at it?
I think it's an incredibly accurate way to look at it. If you think about in cinema, it's got that high dwell component, the large kind of spectaculars, premium inventory. It's got high impact, so it's that credibility builder. And then there's a lot of screens kind of in between. And Octopus, I think, in the ride share TV, it's that one-to-one kind of lean in or even a lean back content experience where you can convert riders into users or signups or what have you in that experience. So I think those 3 buckets are accurate.
So why isn't it growing faster? It seems like I see more screens every day. Yeah, Octopus didn't exist 10 years ago. You didn't have in-cab ads nearly as present. I hear about new ideas in out-of-home all the time. Shouldn't it be growing faster?
There are too many screens. There's the hot take. There's just too much. And there's too much and it's fragmented. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, at some point, but the majority of digital out-of-home programmatic is actually transacted on a PMP. So it's still being sold hand-to-hand combat in the trenches. There's a lot of fragmentation in terms of networks. And then one of the big challenges that most of the companies think of themselves as real estate investment trusts. They think of themselves as REITs. So they don't act like media companies. They don't make decisions like media companies. They make decisions like REITs. And I think that holds the industry back.
Speaking of offline, the 2 things that come to mind when I think about out of home, in addition to what you said, you didn't actually mention, which are billboards on the side of the highway, and then, place-based stuff. So malls, speaking of REITs, are those not like on the radar in terms of like being large enough for digital? Is that like the other half of out of home?
So there are some scaled networks in that. Where we see the biggest growth coming from, I think, is the DSPs being able to aggregate a lot of that fragmented supply, take regional malls and regional footprints and put it together as, hey, this is convenience store media. This is mall media. So combining those otherwise fragmented networks has been one of the advancements, but still one of the biggest challenges.
Why don't we walk through the supply chain from like where the dollars come from, where they go to? Is it easier to start on the sell side or the buy side? Maybe sell side. So someone owns real estate.
Yep.
So you said REIT. So billboards effectively are owned by real estate providers. They own a building. They own a piece of land, whatever. Do they generally get into the out of home business themselves, or do they then contract with somebody?
Typically, it's through a partner. So a lot of the big billboard companies that you'll see, or even in big cities, it's a public-private partnership that's bringing those things to market.
And it differs by spot. So, Eric, you were saying earlier, you have an investment in the bar common restaurant.
Yeah, TAVE.
So there are different companies that are now putting the billboards in place, and they do the maintenance of the hardware in some cases, but they have the ad SDK, stuff like that. Then how does it sell? So you then bring in a programmatic exchange and or you have your own sales force?
Yeah, there's a lot of small networks that are just, hey, let's plug into programmatic and we'll take what we can get. And then there's more scaled, mature networks that say, hey, we've got to go out and we've got to be our own brand champions here. We've got to tell the story and convince people why this media space is valuable. And they're seeing a lot of success.
What are the leading programmatic companies?
So the big media companies are really leading the way. And I think that that's because of controlling valuable real estate. So Lamar is doing a great job on the programmatic side. JC Deco has their own programmatic platform. So kind of the usual suspects are doing a great job, but then there's smaller players. Eric, you mentioned TAVE. We mentioned Octopus, who obviously is now part of the T-Mobile consortium as it is. There are companies like that are doing really smart things and making the right choices that I think have an opportunity to win disproportionate to the rest of the market that's just hanging screens and kind of hoping that if we build it, they will come.
Are the mainstream SSPs like Magnite, PubMatic, Index involved in this?
They are. So, and really you see the main digital out-of-home DSP or SSP rather is a company called Place Exchange that was born out of Intersection Media. Google-backed Intersection Media needed to be able to get their digital inventory onto programmatic pipes. and spun off Place Exchange because of it. So they're one of the leaders globally. You've got other companies like Hivestack that do a good job on the international side, I think, of bringing that inventory together. But those are two of the leaders, and then plugging in subsequently to access that demand.
And what about Vistar? I think a lot of people are familiar with Vistar. I don't know exactly what they do, though.
They emerged as the dedicated digital out-of-home DSP, and they are by far the market leader in terms of dedicated digital out-of-home DSP.
Okay, so there's dedicated DSP, but then you could use an omni-channel DSP. So how do the buyers think about that?
It depends on which buyers we're talking to. So if you think, I think one of the misnomers is that programmatic digital out-of-home is being bought by out-of-home teams. It's really not. Out-of-home teams are buying more digital out-of-home because it's similar to the traditional out-of-home that they've bought, but maybe offers them the ability to be a little bit more dynamic, more timely, things like that. But the programmatic adoption is really coming from programmatic buying teams looking for more space to serve ads onto. About 40% of all the programmatic money goes to billboards. So a lot of money flowing to the large formats, and then everyone else fighting over what's left. 15-second video plays really well. Networks that can take 15-second video, they're winning. But that's kind of where the money goes.
Yeah, I once had the dedicated digital out-of-home buyer described to me as sitting in the basement of a midtown advertising business building with a fax machine, 90 years old, file cabinets showing what they bought in what area of zip codes of the country. Would you take offense to that description?
I would not take offense to that. And I'll give you a story about an account executive I worked with at a billboard company. This is 5 years ago, so still in the modern era. Great guy, one of the most passionate billboard salespeople I've ever met. His CRM system, this is not a joke, I wish it was. His CRM system was a cardboard box with manila folders full of printed out emails, Chinese food menus, Post-it notes. And that's one of the largest billboard companies in the country. Now, that's 5 years ago. Obviously, maybe things have changed. But within the last half decade, that was the CRM system for one of the biggest outdoor media companies in the United States.
I'm sure there's some way to file away your Chinese menus in Salesforce.com. There's probably a marketplace vendor that allows you to do that. So let's go on to let's ignore the dedicated out-of-home people. Let's talk about the digital native people who are now, dabbling here. I have a multi-part question. First part is, do they know that they're buying out-of-home, or are they buying it by accident? The second question is, how are they treating it against their spend that is more traditional? And third is, how are they measuring it?
So the first question, do they know? I believe that this is the reason why PMP is the primary mode of transacting, and it will continue to be, because there needs to be a level of trust and transparency of what the heck am I buying? I talked to a founder of a CTV network, Eric, similar venues to a TAVE, and they shared with me that the previous company they were at, they were selling CTV space, CTV inventory, but all it was like a little sidebar on a TV screen in a bar. It was really like a glorified display ad on a TV screen in some bar or restaurant that probably the buyer had no idea they were in. So I think that remains a disconnect. The second two questions, I didn't get to write them down in time. What were the second parts of those?
How do they coordinate? So, or is it part of the same media plan? Assuming they know what they're buying, are the digital buyers saying, okay, this part is CTV, and here's the KPIs I expect, and then a different line item or different campaign in their DSP is, more what we think of as programmatic, and how do they reconcile them?
I don't see that happening yet. I would like to say I see that, but the conversations that I'm hearing, it's really about how do we integrate digital out of home with our CTV buy. I don't know that anyone's actually figured it out yet. Best practice would certainly be to keep them as separate line items, and then really to think about digital out of home as a full funnel channel. We could do large, high impact formats like billboards. We can do street kind of one to few place-based, placements like the Link NYC kiosk, or we could be one-to-one down funnel in the backseat of a rideshare. So I think thinking about digital out of home holistically as a full funnel channel and then picking which formats, which inventory, which networks, which regions, some of that obviously sounds a lot harder than just let me pick an audience and press go. So it does require probably a little bit extra thinking through, but the segmentation of those teams, CTV versus out of home versus, that is definitely prohibiting growth.
And what about measurement? Obviously, you could put a QR code. I actually was on the New York City subway this morning, heading to a breakfast meeting, and I saw someone use a QR code on an ad to download an app. I was so impressed. It was like a conversion in the wild.
It's a conversion in the wild.
Other than QR codes, how do people measure this stuff?
I think QR is a great barometer of, so they had to have seen it, they had to have been interested, then they had to take out their phone and scan it and want to do whatever the thing was. So I think that represents a segment of the available universe. But one of the cleanest ways to measure out of home is really exposure data. It's lat long exposure data, and then did something happen from that exposed audiences? There's some really cool platforms where you can do web lift, you can do conversion, you can do foot traffic. But again, the challenge remains education and knowing what's available and how do we integrate that with multiple teams across the buy. So there's some really cool ways to measure it beyond QR. I think QR is a useful tool in the right use case, but exposure data is the cleanest way, in my opinion, to measure outcomes.
Just a kind of niche question for you. Oftentimes, and maybe just, this is because Ari and I are in New York City, there's like broken billboards. There's like graffiti over ads, so like, is there like a equivalent of Moat or IAS for out of home to kind of like ensure delivery, QC things? It's less about the, defaced things that you sort of like might notice. It's a little bit more about like how are buyers, sort of like independently of the video example we talked about, how are buyers ensuring that some of those like true out of home placements are like actually delivered, actually up? Is there independent companies that are doing that, or how's it done?
There are some independent companies that are verifying impression delivery and things like that. There is not a great solution for, are the screens on? I'll give you a scary story. During COVID, I was working at a startup and we were building a place-based kind of screen network and some technology to accompany that. And our CTO pinged the Google Maps API to kind of pull all of the stores down. And we were looking at some things. What we were looking at were venues that were closed. And is that inventory listed as still available on the major exchanges? And what we found was it was like north of 80%. Venues that were closed for an indefinite amount of time, but you could still buy inventory on the TouchTunes jukebox in the back corner of the restaurant. It's things like that I think kill the credibility of digital out of home. And for those reasons, I think it's going to be individual networks that do a good job of solving for those pain points that ultimately win.
Yeah, so digital out of home is changing pretty rapidly right now because Uber and other in-car activities is a pretty new experience. And also, I've heard from various people, it's actually in my AMA that I did yesterday, the question of like, is digital out of home converging with CTV? We heard from Eric earlier about bars, bar screens, etc. So it seems like there's a lot going on. You want to give us some thoughts about the future and how it gets out of this rut and increases its percentage of spend?
I don't know if this is one of the answers. I think back to the early days of CTV and the blending of mobile with CTV products. I know that's not everybody's favorite, but I think that there could be a place for digital out of home to own what it is, specific networks to get involved in the conversation. How do we bring down an overall CPM? How do we help allocate the budgets differently? So I think that's one of the opportunities. Really leaning into the conversation around first party data. There's only a couple of networks that can offer it, and I don't hear any of them talking about it, which is interesting to me. And I think it's evidence of, again, that disconnect between REITs, media companies, and where the conversation actually is. There's a really great network that is in most of the major airports around the country. It is all of the screens need to be verified by the government, the FAA, that they are where they say they are and that they are on and functional because they serve critical messaging along with content and ads. So I think that they have some of the elements, and then a network like that does have access to a lot of first party data. I was listening to one of the episodes recently with Michael Levitt about the conversation about travel retail media. And it had the wheels turning around networks like that have kind of these elements. They have, Eric, the third-party verification that the screen is where it is, that it's on. It works. There's no graffiti on it. It's not hanging off the wall because it's in an airport and these things need to be secured. So I think that there's, again, individual network stories like that could continue to emerge. That's where I see the conversation going for the place-based video networks.
Can we take this a step further? So one of the things that I've just, oftentimes gotten wrong was I underestimated the time that it would take for like new formats or new user adoption technologies to like actually hit the mainstream. Examples being voice search, examples being like AR, examples, being sort of like things like that, sound great and futuristic, and they remain in the future evermore. A lot of people think that with full self-driving autonomous vehicles being, like at least, you can see it happen in the future, everybody's just going to be like sitting in their car, watching video, like interacting, and, that can like open up the market for something like this greatly. Do you think that that's like a 5-year, 10-year, like where is that in your crystal ball of timeline? And do you agree that, that's going to be really the future of out of home, which is, we're all just going to be sitting back, getting driven and having, screens in front of us at all times?
I think it definitely sounds nice. I might like to live in that world. I would like to be driven around. I don't know that solves the problems for out of home. I think that the problems for out of home ultimately are infrastructure. I think that the biggest problem for out of home is branding. Digital out of home. Like, what the heck is it? CTV ad. I know what a CTV ad is. I get that. What's an out of home? What's a digital out of home? I don't know. It's CTV, right? And it can be all of those things. It could be a connected TV with an enriched content experience that is one-to-one or one-to-few in the lounge of a private airport. Or it could be the screen that's off in my local coffee, roaster that's never been on. What is it?
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And I personally like, you mentioned Roku as an exciting company to you from an out-of-home perspective when we were doing a little bit of warm-up. Expand on that, because we just had Jay Askenazi on.
So Roku owns a company called BrightSign. BrightSign is the hardware player for about 2 million screens worldwide. So as I continue to just watch what Roku is doing, in the back of my head, I'm thinking about those 2 million screens. So what's cool about BrightSign, this is obviously not a commercial for BrightSign, but they've really adopted a platform strategy in that they will integrate with hundreds of different CMSs. So their goal is to very intentionally be the hardware player for real world screens. That as an activation lever for Roku to suddenly just, hey, we're going to be the brand, right? Digital out of home has a brand problem. Hey, we are going to make this all available via a Roku, I think is really interesting.
I have one last question. How often do people bring up Minority Report to you?
Minority Report and Blade Runner. At least once a day.
Do you have like a pat answer? If I was like, hey man, it's going to be like Minority Report, what would you say to me?
I would say I don't want to live in that world. I'll take the self-driving cars, but you can leave the Minority Report at home. I don't know if I can have my cake and eat it too.
All right, so this was awesome. Tim Rowe, OOHInsider podcast. Do you have a newsletter too? Or
We've got a newsletter. The easiest place to go is the OOHinsider.com. Really active on LinkedIn. That's kind of the hub of all things out of home insider.
Nice. All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with news of the week. This podcast is sponsored by Adelaide. You've probably heard of Adelaide by now. This month, they announced a new product, Adelaide for Publishers. For the first time, publishers can leverage attention metrics to curate inventory, deliver attention insights, and drive higher CPMs. Join the Weather Company, NPR, Westwood One, Cumulus Media, and other leading publishers taking advantage of the attention economy's most popular metric, AU. Maybe one day Mark will convince me to sell guaranteed AU slots on Marketecture, but probably not. Check out AdelaideMetrics.com/AFP for more information.
And we're back. Hope everybody had a good Labor Day weekend. So a few juicy things dropped right before the weekend and right after the weekend. So let's get into it. We've got TTD rumored to be building a TV operating system, a critical analysis of Netflix future in ads, and some other cool stuff around attention and some M&A as well. So we'll start with TTD. So an independent journalist named Janko Rotgers, Janko, sorry if I butchered that, dropped a scoop right before the holiday weekend that TTD is building a TV operating system. We'll put it in the newsletter. I already did a epic breakdown of what this might look like. You should absolutely read that for some primers. We should talk about it. A couple things here, really two. So it's, number one, outside of the fact that this is, kind of awesome, is people working on the product, and I'm quoting the piece, include former senior Roku employees, speaking of, and at least some team members have been hiding the fact that they are employed by the trade desk on LinkedIn. It seems to be a very Apple-y technique there, if indeed it's happening. That was thing one. Thing two, just strategically, I picked up, something in the piece where sounds like they're going to be using a open source version of Android TV OS, which I think A, can make this sort of like easy to get to market, but then B, apparently Android doesn't like when you fork their technologies, so it could be a little bit of a hiccup. Two things that I picked up. What do you guys think? This sounds, I think, some people think it's crazy, some people think it's awesome.
Yeah, I put a lot of my thoughts in the newsletter, but I want to follow up with some reporting. So I've been in contact with, I'll just say one anonymous source, so it's not confirmed by multiple people, but I talked to one person who is in the industry who would have a reason to know the ins and outs here. And they said, yes, definitely happening. And in fact, there are contracts out to most app providers and fast channels already, and they have some signatures for distribution. But with that said, they don't necessarily have manufacturers or glass lined up. That's the reporting I've got from one anonymous source, so take it with a huge grain of salt. The other thing is that I'm still not clear, even my source was not clear, on what this is. Is it a full OS? Or is it just like a thin layer, like a unified ad SDK that might go on top of somebody else's OS? Or are they going to sell TVs? Like, there's like a lot of different ways this could go to market. And the original article wasn't clear on that. And it could, I don't think we should just assume the business plan based on the information we have, which is really pretty thin.
Yeah. Of those three, and we'll get to you in a second, Tim, full OS, kind of like lighter weight ad STK OS, or just, like all in burn the boats, TTD TV. What do you think? 1, 2, or 3?
I think they would love it if there was some way to just do the ads SDK, because if you're trying to talk to a Samsung or a Vizio who already has an OS and already has an ads business, you're asking them to swap the whole thing out, which would be very expensive, a big opportunity cost lost. But if there's some way they could convince them to make this additive to pay them, so that's a new revenue stream and it's not overly disruptive. Maybe if it improves their monetization in some way, then that would be exciting. But I don't really know how that would work.
Tim, one more question all right, and then we'll get to you. What is the level of work and integration for a TV ads SDK?
Well, I think you have something like Android as a starting point. I think you would have to do quite a bit of work to make it very user-friendly. If it's a full OS, consumers are going to care about that a lot. And then the number of hardware variations is going to turn into a big burden. You could see this in the Android world where Google has their own Pixel phone, which they spend the time on, but then they have, tens or hundreds of OEMs, every one of which adds complexity to the operating system and to the integration. So I think the distribution strategy has a lot to do with the level of lift.
Makes sense. Tim, go ahead.
I don't know that I have a take or can add value to that, but I would love to hear from y'all's standpoint of why you think that they are approaching it from this kind of angle. Why are they going this route to solve the problem, do you think?
So big companies do big things. This is a big move, right? This isn't just about facilitating the buying of CTV. This isn't, just about, kind of like, having access to inventory. This is like, actually like having a, root level access to the inventory, being in front of the consumer, having deep integration with the TV players. Like I think that, this is a move that is appropriate for a player of TTD scale. Like, this would be a very big, exciting move. That's my take. What do you think, Ari?
Yeah. So number one, ACR data. It's the gold standard in TV, and it's controlled by other people. Number two is user data. So they're trying to convince all these players in the TV business to give them IDs. And if you have the login at the TV level, it's a lot easier. And number three is disintermediation. They're having to negotiate with a hornet's nest of companies, every single one of which has its own advertising division and wants to not work with Trade Desk ultimately because they'd rather keep the margin themselves. So the whole future of the company is dependent on cooperation among these global behemoth companies who have your worst interest at heart. So I like the swing.
And just a point on the fragmentation, I did a couple of searches, leading up to this. Like, it's not like the mobile or web market where there's like one player to rule them all, i.e. Chrome, and then, Safari, and then a couple others. The operating systems is so fragmented. So Android TV has 6%. Samsung Tizen has, just over 6%. Roku TV has 6%. Fire TV has 6%. SmartCast by Vizio has 6%. So it's like a super fragmented space. So, one would expect that if they can be that ads SDK layer for everyone, this could be like a really exciting, bold move. But it's
they might declare success at 5 or 6%. Maybe that, they're getting the ability to capture some portion of the audience and to have leverage over their distribution partners might be the end game here.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So hopefully more to come on this. And shout out to Janko, who became like really famous in ad tech after I don't think anybody had ever heard of Janko before.
Nice job, Janko.
Yeah, Janko, come on the pod. Okay, we'll continue on the theme of TV. So there was a long and perhaps gossipy story from Insider this week about Netflix's ads leadership, the hunt to replace Peter Naylor, the conflict between programmatic and direct, and product and sales at Netflix. So you should all check it out. It's really, really good. This is like pretty fascinating how publicly this thing is playing out. And I'll pull a quote from the piece just to kind of give some more additional context. People who had conversations with Netflix and said Reinhard, who's the head of sales, appear to still be deliberating on topics like how much Netflix should rely on automated versus direct sales, how much the company should use outside partners to jumpstart growth while it builds its own ad server, how much should it share prized customer data like household income with advertisers, like real existential questions on like the biggest TV platform out there. Ari, if they hired you to be the consultant on this, and there was these big questions around, like build a direct sales team versus programmatic, or in addition to programmatic, give up the user data, measurement, like all of these things, like what would you tell them to do?
I don't know, man. This is a tough one.
Who do they hire? Okay, let's start with who do they hire? Who do they hire? Do they hire a media person? Do they hire an ad tech person?
Well, it depends on the strategy. So I think the theme in this article, which I think is accurate, is that Naylor was brought in to be more traditional ad sales oriented. They mentioned a couple times John Widdicombe as the head of product being more sort of programmatic leaning. And I think the senior execs don't know which way to go. So there's obvious conflict between those two. And then on top of that is this need for them to show results quickly while they, frankly, are new, don't have a lot of clout in the marketplace. They would like to be Hulu tomorrow, but they aren't Hulu today. So that's the transition. What would I do? I'd probably go open to start to juice the revenue. I'd probably just be as friendly as possible to the programmatic world, have a senior sales force for big upfronts, but get a big portion of my revenue in the most liquid way possible. And then just start, as we gain market power per country, start tamping down and allowing less and less access over time to get back to where we think we should be ultimately. That's just my general take, but I think it's a pretty hard problem.
Yeah, it is. What would be beyond the go-to-market strategy, the sort of obvious being able to turn on a bunch of revenue in that way? Would you focus on the customer data? Would you focus on ad formats? Like, what are the things that you think are interesting that can help Netflix be what we all believe that it can be?
Yeah, so Netflix has amazing first-party customer data because they have a subscription relationship with every household. They know the household, they know the credit card number, they probably know how many people are in the household. They know a lot of things that are very valuable. So I would definitely look to use that data either in PMP form or through a clean room of some kind. I think the content data is not very valuable. Genre or other context of the actual programs is probably not that valuable. You just want to use it in broad swaths so you don't show, kids ads on adult content, that sort of thing. But I would definitely use geo. I would use household data. And I like what they're doing on the distribution side. They started with Xandr through the Microsoft relationship. That was obviously going to be short-lived because Xandr's not a very popular DSP. Now they've opened up to the Trade Desk and DV360, which are the two leading DSPs. So this seems kind of smart to get that distribution. As for creative, everyone wants to do creative, but ultimately just slap a QR code on your ad and call it a day.
That's where we disagree, but that's okay. We can disagree. Tim, what you got?
I think it's interesting that whether you're Netflix or a small budding digital out-of-home network, that you probably have the same decisions to make. It sounds like the problems exist at every level of scale. I'm thinking about the conversation that you had with Craig from Condé Nast and Mark Menino, and kind of pulling those two things together. Of Mark talked about financial media networks, and Craig talked about time on platform being kind of that new metric, consumption being the new currency. It feels like there's an opportunity there to integrate more of that data to keep me on Netflix longer. So I don't know how that ultimately plays out, but maybe it's smart things like that. Because to me, Netflix is still a premium product. It's a premium product. It's got to be smart. Don't do like what Samsung. I don't need to see 7 of the same Capital One ads in one commercial break. So I look to Netflix to keep a premium experience.
Tim, you did your homework before coming on this podcast. I'm very impressed by all your call outs for our previous episodes.
I love the Marketecture podcast, and I'm going to be listening now after we get off here, because I think that what you do is you bring together so many of those stories that seem disjointed and disconnected. To me, they are all very connected.
Man, we're going to have you back.
And my God, we are never going to hear the end of this from Mark Menino.
Let's go, Mark.
You've created a monster. We didn't put this on the docket, but worth noting that apparently Amazon had an incredible upfront. Numbers weren't provided, but sounds like buyers who were surveyed said they increased their spend with Amazon significantly, and they cited the efficiencies in CPMs being one of the factors. So just sort of kind of another data point hanging out there. Super interesting stuff. So a couple other things, and we'll call it a day. So IAB and MRC are collaborating for attention measurement, specifically around attention measurement accreditation. So we talked about Adelaide, who my fund invested in a couple of weeks ago, and this idea of attention being an emergent category. And Ari, I'll ask you, tell me if I'm right or wrong. I think this is a good step towards validation of the category, right? Like something for this is needed.
Yeah, I think someone told me, I can't source it, but someone told me there's like 20 different attention vendors out there trying to get advertiser dollars.
I can confirm.
Adelaide's the only one who advertises on this podcast, so shout out to them. But yeah, if you have that situation with that many vendors calling on agencies and advertisers, then the more standardization, the better. I think I've said this on a previous pod, which is I do not think attention should be a currency. I believe in currencies that are very conservative and can be measured at scale. And I think attention, step one is getting some accreditation and some standards. Let's not go too crazy the way we did with viewability. But I think it would definitely help to have this.
Yeah, agreed. Feels like attention is also tailor-made for out of home. Right, Tim?
Well, it's interesting because out of home as an industry is moving away from attention as the currency. To date, mostly the effort has been to adopt a currency of likelihood to see. Recently, there's been an effort to move towards opportunity to see, aided by, ironically, the MRC. So I don't know what's going on.
Everybody using those QR codes.
You know what it is? Here's your hot take. I think that I think that there is, by some, an effort to potentially artificially inflate the amount of impressions that some of this media gets so that they can make more money, versus drive down to the job to be done of creating investment confidence for marketers who've never used the channel before to spend on it without losing sleep at night. I think. One man's opinion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, cool. Well, we'll keep an eye on it. Little M&A news. So Attitude, which is a programmatic company for publishers, acquired Hashtag Labs. All right, I think you're more familiar with these companies. Why don't you give us the breakdown of this deal?
Yeah, so I think, and I might be wrong, I know what Hashtag Labs does. I interviewed them on Marketecture. We've made that interview free with registration on marketecture.tv, so you should listen to it. They effectively are automated way for publishers to manage their monetization. So they have technology that will manage your header bidding setup, your pre-bid, will do all of that sort of stuff, add tags. It's like a big tag management system, really slick UI. I was pretty impressed by the product when I saw it. I think Attitude is kind of the same thing, but also with monetization and services.
Freestar Raptive?
Yeah, I think so. But I don't know if it's exclusive like Raptive or if it's more just like a service. I'm just unclear. Maybe we should have someone from them on the show. But basically, it's a bit of a broader solution than Hashtag.
Got it. Makes sense. I think consolidation of these companies to service publishers makes a lot of sense. So good job. And check out that free interview on Marketecture TV. 2 quick notes, and then we'll call it a day. So everybody should absolutely look at that deck that you got a hold of for the DoubleClick acquisition thesis. That was killer.
Yeah, a little backstory here. So I think the moral of the story is don't get me having a grudge against you, because like 4 years ago, I was I saw this deck firsthand when I worked at DoubleClick. I wasn't responsible for it, but I saw it. So I knew it existed, and I didn't have a copy. And 4 years ago, I was on Alex Kantrowitz's Land of the Giants podcast. He did an episode about Google and its dominance in advertising, and I was like the first guest on, and I gave him the whole story. There was a thing called YMAG. It's called YMAG because Yahoo, Microsoft, AOL, and Google were the only people big enough to buy DoubleClick. And there's a spreadsheet, and it's been lost to history, and it's really exciting and interesting. So that was my story. Immediately after me, they had my good friend Neil Mohand on. And Neil was my boss at DoubleClick, and he has had an amazing career. He's now the CEO of YouTube. And Neil gets on the podcast, and he's asked about YMAG by Alex, and he goes, I don't know about that. I don't think that's true. And he created the podcast. So he fibbed online and made me look bad. And I love you, Neil, if you're listening. I really don't think he's listening. But if you are listening, I got your back here, man. We found it. So eat it, Neil.
You didn't put that in your newsletter, to be clear.
I did not.
All right, excellent. So Marketecture listeners, you got the scoop directly from Ari in this one. That is awesome backstory. One thing that is like non-ad tech related, but got ad tech X all fired up that I want to close out with is founder mode. So there was a post by Y Combinator's Paul Graham talking about a new term that he invented called founder mode, inspired by Airbnb's CEO's speech. And everybody's mad about it or loves it. And effectively, this is about founders just working more directly on the company, in the company, not having professional managers making decisions and getting their hands dirty. Tim, start with you. Are you for founder mode or are you against founder mode, and why?
All for founder mode. If founder mode is being led by presumably some semblance of the founding team, I think it creates the connective tissue to the original thesis. Why are we here? What do we stand for? I think that those things can get lost as teams get big. I'm a fan.
All right.
I have complex thoughts here. It's definitely real. The founder knows more than anybody else, and they care more. And those are the two important things. And I want to emphasize knows more, because it's impossible to come in as a VP or a CXO at a company and know every little choice and mistake that was made over the X years beforehand. And when you're the founder, you literally know every single mistake, and you can see patterns that other people can't see and make decisions. I actually found this the other side when I joined AppNexus as their first head of product. And I had all kinds of thoughts that immediately, like Brian and Mike Nolan, were like, nope, tried it, sorry. Like, and that's a little humbling, but it's true. The one thing I will say is that I think was Brian Chesky from Airbnb is the person who brought this up. He has sort of a history of saying inflammatory things that are, typical Silicon Valley groupthink, like MBAs are bad, product managers are bad. And, those are really stupid thoughts to have. MBAs are great if you use them for what they're good for. So I think that the danger of founder mode is it's an endorsement of micromanaging, which is a terrible mistake. What it is an endorsement of is caring and staying involved and very actively managing the people you bring in as professionals, even in categories that you may not care about, like HR and finance and legal. As a founder, spend the time, dig deeper. I love the idea of skip levels, but it is not an excuse to micromanage. It's not an excuse to say that the VPs I hire are not qualified or should not be given the power they need to do their jobs. And you really have to be subtly balancing those two things.
Yeah, I think that was very well said. And, I think one of the valid criticisms of, if founder mode now becomes a thing and, these hats are getting printed up, does it, become now an excuse for bad behavior by bad founders? And that's not something that, we ever want to see. But I think that's right. And just like even thinking back to my own career, like, hiring managers and, abdicating everything to these managers, mistake. Like micromanaging these managers in areas where you have, little subject matter expertise, mistake. But, there's something there that I think is very interesting. Speaking of founder mode, we dropped an interview that we recorded a couple of weeks ago with Brian O'Kelly, former founder and CEO of AppNexus, he just mentioned on Open Market. It was really good. You should listen to it. And we've got a founder's founder coming on today for an emergency pod on founder mode. So we're like trying to advance this a little bit.
I haven't listened to that yet. I will, but I will say that O'Kelly, when he was involved in technical decisions, was he had written much of the stack or designed it in any case. And even 10 years later, that founder mode aspect mattered enormously because he just knew how you could build stuff in a way that no engineering manager who was brought in later could ever do it.
Yeah, well said. Okay, I think we've done a lot here. Want to take us home?
Yeah, sure. So this has been a great episode. We've learned a lot about digital out of home or do, whatever you want to call it. So Tim Rowe from OOHInsider, thank you so much for being here.
Eric, all right, thank you both.
This is awesome. Thank you very much.
This was great. We'll see you next week.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you for subscribing to Marketecture. New interviews are added every week at marketecture.tv and your favorite podcasting app.
Thank you for listening to the Marketecture podcast. New episodes come out every Friday, and an insightful vendor interview is published each Monday. You can subscribe to our library of hundreds of executive interviews at marketecture.tv. You can also sign up for free for our weekly newsletter with my original strategic insights on the week's news at news.marketecture.tv. And if you're feeling social, we operate a vibrant Slack community that you can apply to join at adtechgod.com.